Okay, hi there and welcome to a quick update video on the state of the UK economy 6 months on from the imposition of lockdown during the pandemic. So it'll come as no surprise, but official data now shows the depth of the recession that has affected the UK economy in the first 6 months of the year. Between April and June 2020, that's the second quarter of the year, the level of real GDP, a measure of output and spending on goods and services and the income we earn from producing them, level of GDP fell by 20.4%. The UK is now officially in recession for the first time in more than a decade, and this is, without question, the deepest decline in output in modern UK economic history. Indeed, it's also the steepest fall of any high-income G7 country. It's also the biggest fall in GDP for the UK since the invention of the concept of gross domestic product. There was an estimated rebound of 8.7% in June, which is more optimistic and suggests that output is now recovering slowly as the economy gradually recovers from lockdown. But put this in global context, the IMF is now forecasting that the world economy, which normally grows at about 3% per year, the world output of GDP will shrink by just under 5% in 2020, making it the worst recession since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Only Spain, amongst OECD countries, has seen a bigger contraction in real GDP. Here's the figures for the UK, taking national output 22% plus lower than it was at the start of the year. There are significant sectoral elements to the data. There's a lot of variability in the data worth identifying. So services are down 20% in the second quarter, manufacturing and construction 17%, construction is down by 35%. Look at two sectors there where output has collapsed completely. Air transport services down by 96%, the car sector output down by more than 60%. Pharmaceuticals, as you'd expect, I suppose, in the public health crisis, up by 23%. Accommodation and food services, another industry that was down, I think, something like 85% in the second quarter. The closure of bars and hotels and other hospitality businesses. Indeed, many businesses, according to this survey, the monthly business survey, reported no turnover in June 2020. And indeed in April 2020, the figure was obviously its highest during lockdown. 42.5% of construction companies reported no turnover. Services drive the economy. Services are something like 79-80% of the British economy. Production, that includes manufacturing, is about 13% and construction is about 6%. Well, there are many reasons being offered as to why the UK might have been so badly impacted relative to other advanced high-income countries. One of them is social spending. So what I've done in this chart is I've put together the 5 components you may well be familiar with, the 5 components of aggregate demand, C plus I plus G plus X minus M, and you can see what's happened in the first and second quarter. One big aspect is that consumer spending was down 23% during April, May and June. Now, a large part of that is social spending. That's the pounds we spend on going to the cinema, maybe having a meal out, or perhaps even taking a holiday. And social spending accounts for a bigger percentage of consumer spending in the UK, which of course itself is a high percentage of aggregate demand. Private consumer spending, by the way, was 70% of the fall in GDP in the second quarter of 2020. And with business expectations pretty low, business confidence has a low ebb, many companies issuing profits warnings, announcing redundancies, one would also expect planned investment to be falling, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. And this is confirmed by data which shows that gross capital investment, total investment spending, fell by 37% in the second quarter of the year. Well, what about the labour market? What are we seeing happening? Because obviously there's been a collapse in output. Surely this must show through to consequences for employment and unemployment. Well, the number of people in work has contracted sharply. So in July 2020, there were 730,000 fewer people in paid work when compared with March 2020. And you'd expect this, but the biggest job losses were in airlines, holiday operators, non-food retailers forced to shut down, car making, and obviously businesses in supply chain sectors. Businesses, for example, supplying the aerospace sectors, or businesses supplying component parts to vehicle manufacturing. So employment's down by 750,000. A lot of people, of course, have been furloughed, so the number of hours worked has collapsed. Of those who still have a job, this chart shows the biggest quarterly decrease in the total number of weekly hours worked since records began in 1971. Now, the number of people being made redundant in the UK is starting to rise, as you can see in this chart, although the scale of redundancies is not yet comparable to what happened in the financial crisis and subsequent recession in 2008 and 2009. You can see that redundancies are increasing, but perhaps the furlough scheme, where up to 9 million people have been kept on furlough, subsidised by the government, perhaps the furlough scheme has helped to limit this change during lockdown. But are we getting close to a tipping point with redundancies, particularly as the furlough scheme comes to an end at the end of October? One measure of unemployment is the claimant count. That's the people who are eligible to claim the job seekers allowance, people who have registered to start claiming that particular benefit. It's not the same as the labour force survey measure, which is a broader survey of activity in the labour market. But look at this chart. The claimant count measure of unemployment has more than doubled since March 2020. It's increased by 117% since the start of lockdown. The number of people claiming unemployment-related benefits has increased by 1.4 million over the period, a significant increase in that measure. Well, we go back to the original chart, actually, the collapse in GDP taking the UK into the deepest recession in modern times. And the point I'm making here is that the jury is out on what might be the longer term, perhaps permanent cost of this economic and health crisis. And the collapse in output was inevitable, given the decision to lock down large parts of the economy, to help protect public health. But there's a lot of uncertainty about whether and how quickly the economy will recover in the months and quarters to come. Big uncertainty about the extent to which a big extra round of fiscal and or monetary policy stimulus might be needed to support incomes, demand and jobs. And a recession of this depth, let's be clear, will almost certainly lead to some economic scarring effects, particularly amongst those people most badly affected by the pandemic. Younger workers in hospitality, older workers in retail, workers from a BAME background who've been most negatively affected by the outbreak, and also obviously at higher risk of exposure to the virus in many of the jobs that they're involved with. We wait to see what some of the scarring effects will be and whether the UK economy will be able to lift itself out of this deep recession.